Tonight, we have a closer look at a new partnership launched this week between nonprofit media organizations around Southeast Michigan, including Detroit Public Television. It's called the Detroit Journalism Cooperative. Its focus, to pool resources and tell in-depth stories on Detroit's path through bankruptcy and beyond. Detroit is in the middle of a historic journey, and while the country watches to see what will happen next, we're living it. Bankruptcy. How does it impact our communities? What do people truly think? Where are the solutions? There are so many stories beyond the headlines, and a new media partnership will help us tell them and bring them to a wide audience. The Detroit Journalism Cooperative is made up of nonprofit media organizations, including the Center for Michigan's Bridge Magazine, WDET Radio, Michigan Radio, the newspapers of New Michigan Media, and Detroit Public Television. Funding for the Detroit Journalism Cooperative comes from the Knight Foundation and the Ford Foundation. Together, we'll work on this opportunity for deeper coverage and engagement with the community during this unprecedented time in Detroit's history. Joining me now to talk about the Detroit Journalism Cooperative is Vince Duffy. He is the news director at Michigan Radio, and Dr. Haig Oshagan, director of New Michigan Media. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me on MiWeek. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having us.
Vince, people might be very familiar with Michigan Radio, but Haig, people may not be familiar with New Michigan Media. Talk a little bit about how many media organizations it's representative of.
New Michigan Media is the collaboration between the largest minority ethnic or the leading minority and ethnic media in this region. The core group includes the Arab American News, the Latino Press, the Jewish News, the Korean Michigan Asian Weekly, and the Michigan Chronicle. But for this project that we'll be talking about, it's the Michigan Citizen that's joining us.
So this is quite a project which is launching today. Vince, talk a little bit about, I think, some of the stories that we're going to start to jump into here as we work all together really as a team.
The goal is to bring all of the public media together to sort of strengthen the whole project of talking about Detroit and its bankruptcy and what's going to be happening after the bankruptcy. And so you'll see all sorts of different stories. I know at Bridge Magazine and the Center for Michigan, they're going to be doing a lot of data-driven reporting. One of the things that we'll be doing at Michigan Radio is taking that data and sort of putting a narrative to it, telling the stories that can come from that data. So our reporter Lester Graham had a story that aired today about the difficulties that Detroit is going to face after its bankruptcy with jobs. And once the city is solvent again, that's not going to solve all the problems. You still have lots of people who are unemployed in Detroit, and a large part of its income tax base coming from people who work in the city but live outside the city. So it'll be stories about what's happening with Detroit, trying to make the bankruptcy as transparent as we can, and what difficulties Detroit is going to face after it's out of the court process, and try to rebuild the city after that.
And that's something that I think we're focused so much on the bankruptcy process right now that maybe we aren't looking down the road, and that's a great way to give perspective to. Hi, people might say we have a lot of media outlets right now. We have the newspapers and we have television stations. What makes this different, do you think?
Well, the collaboration makes a difference as well. I mean, I don't think there's ever been in this region this kind of sharing of resources, sharing of stories, working together, planning out among these outlets how to best cover a major event in the city's life. And I think it should result in much better coverage, much more thorough coverage, much deeper coverage, and really, I think, a better understanding of the bankruptcy process, both in its sort of legal and technical framework, but as well in its impact on people's lives and how it's going to change Detroit.
People might also wonder, how do you choose stories? There are so many stories. There's so many stories to tell. How are we going to go about paring down the most important ones?
Well, there's a meeting that's going to take place each week, and we're in, if the last 24 hours are any indication, we're in sort of constant communication with each other about what stories are going to take place. And it sort of will be decided the way that we do it traditionally. And what are the most interesting things that are happening out there? What are the questions that audience have that they would like to have answered? And what are the things that perhaps aren't being covered on a day-to-day basis that could use a deeper dive? So those are the stories that we'll be looking at and hopefully answering questions that people have about it.
From your perspective, what aren't the stories that are being covered? What are the stories that I think that you would like to see?
Well, our particular contribution of New Michigan Media's newspapers will be to explore the ways in which bankruptcy is affecting the minority communities of the area. And so, for example, the Latino press will cover the Latino community and the impact of bankruptcy on that community. The Arab American news will cover the impact of the bankruptcy on the Arab community. The Michigan Citizen, the African American community. The Jewish news, the Jewish community. And the Michigan Korean Weekly, the Asian community, the Korean community. And I mean, it should give us different faces to what can often be a faceless process, you know, awash and drowning in numbers. But where really people's lives are being affected, communities are being affected, and I think that's what's often missing. And we hope to be able to sort of put color on what can often be a very colorless sort of the depiction of a process.
The bankruptcy exists outside of the courtroom, in the streets and neighborhoods of Detroit. And so those are some of the stories that we hope to bring as well.
I think what's also really exciting about this is we all work in tandem. We're all sort of working on sometimes some of the same stories, and we all know each other through public media. But to be able to pool resources and say, what are you working on, and how can we help you with that, and how can we televise what you're working on radio,
right.
and is, I think, probably one of the most exciting processes of this, because we are invested, because we live here, and we're living this process as well.
We sometimes are competitors in different areas of the media, but this is a story that's so big that no one single institution has been able to cover the entirety of it as well. And so, you know, the efforts of bringing everybody together, I think, will provide more full, richer coverage, and it's just going to benefit the people who are our audience.
And we're looking so much forward to it. Gentlemen, thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us today as we kick this cooperative off. And you'll be hearing more about the Detroit Journalism Cooperative in the coming year. We're going to have stories and specials here on MiWeek, as well as other programs on Detroit Public Television like American Black Journal and Detroit Performs. Check out the efforts from our partners online at nextchapterdetroit.com and at myweek.org. Tell us what you think and the stories that you would like to see. And that is going to do it for MiWeek. I'm Christy McDonald. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next week.
Business Leaders for Michigan is dedicated to making Michigan a top 10 state for jobs, personal income, and economic growth. Learn more at businessleadersformichigan.com. Funding is also provided by Delta.